Tash and I are really excited today to bring Gia Scinto, who's a partner at Cole Group. Cole Group's a firm that specializes in go-to-market executive hires, and Gia has helped build out go-to-market teams at startups you would know, like Airbnb, Stripe, Datadog, Cloudflare, Confluent, Canva, and a number of other great companies. Prior to Cole Group, Gia was the first talent leader at Y Combinator, and prior to YC, one of the first executive talent partners at Andreessen Horowitz. Gia started her career at a top-tier global executive search firm in their San Francisco tech practice. She was at Microsoft, helping build out the executive talent function by creating an agency model in-house, and was at Cisco in similar roles. And when I have peers in go-to-market who are looking to talk to one of the best in the industry, I always refer them to Gia. So Gia, every company needs help with two things. They need help with revenue and recruiting. It's candidates and customers.
Yeah.
And when Andreessen came into the scene, they helped with both of those things. And it was a unique offering for VC firms. And you were one of the first talent people at a VC firm. The other firms didn't have competing offerings. Can you take us back to that time and share a little bit what it was like to be one of the first talent partners in the VC industry?
Yeah. 2011. And I like to say, honestly, I had no idea what I was getting into. And maybe that's a good thing. But the first year was figuring out what we were going to measure and to make sure the portfolios don't make a bad hire. And the portfolio was pretty small. I can't remember the exact number, but by the time I left, there was over 300 portfolios. So the role did change year over year. So figuring out what we were going to measure, I think if you don't have metrics, like why do it? So what we ended up, if I think back now, what did we decide to measure? I think we were just some of the basic things. What do the founders need to launch a search or not launch a search, or what type of hire do they need to make, and what are the hard and soft skills and why, and how are they going to pitch? And it's just like soup to nuts. Do they really need to spend money on hiring a search firm, or how can we do it otherwise? What does our network look like to help supplement? And there's just a lot of things that once we got clear on the metrics, in the second year became very clear what we needed to do to support the portfolio, which was the mantra for the entire firm, because as you know, they had other operating teams, right? And the value prop was we build these networks to plug the portfolio into the network to help them get to market faster. So whether that was through the marketing team or the go-to-market team or the exec recruiting team or the technical talent team, like we all had the same value prop. And so when it became very clear that, okay, well, Gia can't build out all these networks. And at that time, I did raise my hand and say, okay, I'll focus on go-to-market. And then we need to hire a couple more talent people, someone to focus on engine products, someone to focus on finance, HR. And that's sort of how it started. And I could talk a lot about how we built those networks. I like to talk about that it was such a privilege to not be reactive and transactional like recruiting can be. And this is an opportunity for me to like sit down with hundreds of go-to-market leaders at all levels and be a student and listen to how they run their play or what their process is, ask really dumb questions, because I wasn't necessarily interviewing them, but I was learning about their skill set, how they did it, the go-to-market motion at that company and this company. And just, I feel like I got better at assessment and I was able to offer better advice to founders, because I do take it really serious. If I'm going to give any founder advice, I better know what I'm talking about. To some degree, I am a recruiter. I don't think I'm a CRO, but I feel like I know enough to be dangerous. And then backing that up with like, okay, if the founder doesn't necessarily trust what I have to say, I have people in my network as subject matter experts that I can introduce that will advise the founder in a way where we can now be very clear around what type of hires we need in the function and why. As the firm evolved, we were really good at capturing a lot of data. I think founders trust data. So whether it was compensation data or hiring process, soup to nuts, like it took this many days, you interviewed this many candidates, and just data behind everything you do in recruiting, I think helped founders make decisions quicker. And so we did spend a lot of time building out that content and making it easier for founders to grab it in a portal and so on and so forth. So.
It's great to have those benchmarks to know if you're doing a good job yourself. And as your privilege was to talk to all of these great go-to-market leaders, in order to recognize great, you have to have seen great. And it sounds like you saw a lot of great leaders. After you left Andreessen and went to YC, what was that experience like? And how did the needs of founders differ from those who you worked with at Andreessen?
I would say there was no difference in founders per se, right? But very different, like completely deprogrammed me from traditional venture capital. So that was good. And YC is like a university. Everything YC does is somewhat of a program. And they had raised a fund. And so I was sitting on the continuity side. That was the name of the fund. They had subsequently shut that down. But I would say that how the role differentiated, I was building programs. We launched the growth program, and that was like a total experiment in the beginning and then became repeatable twice a year. Growth program was like you have your undergrad and then your graduate degree. And it was focused on company building across all company phases of growth, but also just even functionally how your company is growing and when HR becomes really important. So we tried to cover a lot of ground, and I won't go into too much detail, but that was the growth program. And I built out another program called executive councils. That was like the board meeting that you can't have with your board. And if you want me to talk about that more, I can, but did a lot of office hours. YC, I think at the time had more than 3,000 portfolio companies that were alive, seed stage, A, B stage, C, D, E, F stage. And I probably spent my time mainly with the more earlier stage and A and B stage with the continuity fund. And honestly, my job was like wrapping a warm blanket around the founders and trying to help them solve all talent needs across all levels, from compensation to hiring to pairing them up with the right recruiter, maybe the recruiter specialized in design, having networks of subject matter experts, right? And to be able to have this repository to go into and give them what they need. One last thing, I don't know if you've heard of Bookface. YC has their own knowledge portal, and I think it's pretty powerful. I've never seen anything like it. So you can ask a question about sales operations and get a lot of advice with the YC portal.
Yeah, I could pick your brains on all of this stuff for ages. As somebody who's been the last 8 years kind of operating in VC, supporting companies, it all rings very, very true and resonates a lot. And you are really an OG, having been doing this since started out doing this in 2011, where really that kind of ecosystem of support around founders just wasn't there. Whereas now it's table stakes, right? And it's expected more and more so from founders when they're taking on capital from VCs. They're like, what else am I going to get with it? And we definitely see that talent and support on the many facets of what you need under the umbrella of talent is huge. But I want to sort of bring it back to more specifically on go-to-market and thinking about talent within that go-to-market area. And obviously, look, with different stages of companies, they require different personnel. You gave a great example with YC. You were more hands-on perhaps with the earlier sort of seed to A businesses, but there are companies much further down the funnel. When a founder is making their first sales hire or a first sales leader versus a later stage hire, what do they need to be thinking about? What's the sort of advice you would be giving them?
Yes. So early stage, first thing I would say is hire someone that's still close to the sales process itself. So that could come in the form of a first line or a second line leader, someone that's going to roll up their sleeves and sell and help bring some sales hygiene and efficiency to your sales motion or your sales process. And maybe you don't even have a really efficient process, which is generally the case. So what I say is, like, from hiring to ramping to selling to pricing to goals or OKRs, whatever you want to call it. So my advice is, okay, what do you want them to do? And sometimes I think founders get a lot of advice that is not necessarily the best advice. But if it is obviously early stage, is there any salespeople in the company? Maybe there's one, maybe there's two. And so if you're hiring your first head of sales, they are going to behave like an AE in some way. They shouldn't be too far in the weeds, but we do need them to be close to the process, like I said. And other things that I would recommend, have they seen greatness? Where did they see greatness? What was the sales DNA at that company? Have they also had hard times? Like, have they sold really crappy software and still hit their quota? I mean, I'd hire that person all day long. No offense to the person that was at Google and then Dropbox and Slack, but I think those companies are great, but I think times are hard. We look for in the beginning of their career, President's Club, President's Club, President's Club, President's Club, and then obviously upward trajectory. But when you see that, like, chances are this person could be a star, and then still hungry, still driven, still competitive. I also think I mentioned earlier that data builds trust with founders. So some sort of analytical horsepower, you have to test for that, but whether it's a pedigree from a degree or it's just the methodologies that they've used, and do they have the ability to customize a sales process for your company? Because there's some level of creativity in that. It's not always intellectual horsepower, but I do think both play together. That's some of my quick advice on early stage sales hiring.
And what's the right moment where the founder, I just got off the call with one of our founders and he was like, I now need to put on my AE hat and get into selling mode. Like, what's the right moment generally where you see this inflection point between the founder-led sales transitioning to, okay, we're actually now ready to hire somebody?
Yeah. One thing that I see is the founder having some level of humility that they can't do it anymore. In the respect of, like, they're going to always be customer facing, but they don't know how to increase conversion rates. I see founders, watching the gongs of their AEs, and they're just not talking about the technology in the right way. Or if they just would have done this one thing with the pricing, it could have closed the deal faster. And so it just becomes too much for the founder. Like, can't solve all these problems. And from a time management standpoint to like number of direct reports, there's just so much buildup. But I would hope that the founder actually wants to hire someone that's going to educate them some around that they know how to do it better. And so it's all of those things, from too many direct reports to things starting to break. That is the most important thing, that startups have things that need to be fixed. And I just don't think one person can fix all those things. So that's how you back up into, like, what do you want this person to do? Is what do we need to build, rebuild, and fix?
So the founder has that degree of humility. They're open to learning from somebody better than them, which is ultimately why you hire great people in functional areas. So they've come to that realization. What then, in your view and from your wealth of experience, are the key tenets to running a successful recruiting and search process?
I'm so obsessed with this because this is all I do all day long. But there's a beginning and a middle and an end. There's the top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel, like in the recruiting process. But in the very beginning, kicking off a project with a founder, I'm trying to get as deep as I possibly can into, some of the things that I mentioned about what needs to be fixed or built. But I'll go back to that in a minute. In the beginning, I'm learning about their go-to-market motion. I'm learning about their product differentiation. I'm learning about their customers. I'm learning about their entire go-to-market motion as it exists today. So there's that. But then it's like, okay, you're a developer tools company. You have an ICP, and so we need somebody that has sold into a technical buyer. So I call this the minimum experience threshold. This is like 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, and a garage, like going on Redfin. People call it the must-haves, right? This is what we are not going to compromise around. So we need someone that's sold into a technical buyer. We need someone that's seen this stage before, just that they're, even if they were just an AE at this stage, but they are comfortable in the environment the way it is today. Could be chaos, it doesn't matter, but there's not a lot of process probably implemented. So stage, and I think the obvious, some level of trajectory or some level of diversity in their background. We have founders layer on things that you shouldn't have more than 3, in all honesty. You can have a 4th, but they start getting into soft skills. And I'm trying to keep it like, they want someone analytical. They want somebody with a computer science degree. I mean, now we're getting into shrinking the universe, right? So when you define your minimum experience threshold, there's this many people. And then when you get to what are the priorities? Congratulations, you have product market fit, you have $1 million in revenue. What's the next hill to climb? What are the headwinds you're facing? And just tell me what's going on in the business and how that parlays into what you want this person to do. And again, 3 things, not 10, because there's probably 20. If you can distill those 3 things down, that becomes the job description. Like, these job descriptions are so generic, 10 years of experience selling SaaS software into developers. Like, that's not helpful. That's not the job. That's just table stakes, right? And we need this person to do these things because these 3 things are going to move the needle and hopefully grow the company. And so in the beginning, it's really getting clear on what you want this person to do, what are the priorities, and what is the minimum experience you're looking for. I obviously talk to founders about compensation. I think, especially for sales, they're expensive. And I think this person, if they're a really good hire, they're going to pay for themselves. And so to try to get over a little bit of the sticker shock, the person should be like selling and closing deals and putting money in the bank. So remember that. Everyone does it at this stage for equity. So it's not like the compensation should be out of market or unfair, but just making sure that if your expectations are really high and you want greatness, and we're going to hire the best person, they might cost more than you thought. But that's just a reality check to figure out in the beginning of a search, in the beginning of a process. And then there's the mid stage. By the way, beginning, middle, and end, I said back channel referencing along these 3 stages, so there's no surprises in the end. And in the middle of your recruiting process, hiring a sales leader, I think everyone has to check themselves against what we said we're looking for. Do we have people interviewing? Do we feel good? Or do we think we can close anyone at the top of the funnel? And if you don't, then what does the middle of the funnel look like? And that's what actually keeps me up at night, is generating pipeline, having candidates throughout the process, and not just betting on the top of the funnel that we're going to close someone. That's not the proper way to run a search. The bottom of the funnel is so important because, again, in terms of the recruiting process, what are these people saying? Why are they not interested? What is the reason? It used to make me crazy when I would look at a search methodology. I'd look at the report and it would just make no sense. And why is this person even on this list? That would be someone we would never even target for this job. So do we have the right strategy? Are we targeting the right people? Why are those people saying no? Because I think it's important to course correct really quickly in the first couple of weeks of a search from the bottom of the funnel. Maybe the recruiter's not pitching the company in the right way. And we're not pulling, you have one shot with these sales or any go-to-market leader. And if you're pitching a startup, you need to hit on the things that they care about the most. And so again, I just think that bottom of the funnel tells a story, and that story helps us run an efficient beginning, middle, and end close. Yeah, that's some of my best advice. I could keep going on this topic because there's other things in the process around, when you get to the final stage and what you do there. If you want, I can talk about a little bit. I did the end of a search process. I think we tend to grill the candidates throughout the entire process. And that tables turn when you have a finalist. And now it's their turn to grill. Hopefully they're grilling in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, but sometimes we don't allow them to do that. And that's not always the best. So if I go back, though, to something really important to me, advice that I try to adhere to with founders, but we always customize the recruiting process towards what works for each company. I don't think they're all the same, but we do have these very foundational pieces that we make sure we implement. And when I go back to the priorities, I like to advise founders around interviewing the candidate against one of the priorities. You're going to meet them a second time and a third time, and then pick the second priority. And when I say interviewing them, just asking them how they accomplished that very specific priority that you want them to accomplish at your company. How did they solve for something like that in the past? This becomes like a mini working session. So if you're going deep in these topics, priorities, then there should be some level of conviction from the founder that wow, this person can help me. I feel good about making this hiring decision. And by the time you get to the end, you've had these mini working sessions because you're not doing a resume readout. Hopefully that's what your recruiter is doing. Hopefully they're providing you with all the details in someone's background that aligns with what we're looking for. But more importantly, you should drill down on the things that are important to you. And in the end, you can still have a finalist present some sort of go-to-market task, which I have a ton of suggestions about of different things you can do. But you might be able to skip that step because you've already gotten to a level of depth around what you want this person to do that maybe you have enough trust in your judgment to hire them. So obviously they meet the board, more back channel references. Yeah. So
I love that. Thank you for walking us through this beginning, middle, and final closing. I'd love to start at the top and pull the thread a little bit more
yeah,
on this
please.
detail. On and I love how you articulated the job definition, just what needs to be done, and this idea of a minimum experience threshold. I've never heard that term, but I think it's a great way to define this. And the question that you highlighted is, how did they solve for something like this in their past role? I think that's a great tip for founders to questions and working sessions they can use in an interview process. And for a technical founder who maybe has never interviewed or hired salespeople, you mentioned a couple other things, attributes that good sales leaders should have, like hunger or resourcefulness. If you're a founder, or especially a technical founder, what are some good interview questions you should have for a salesperson in the interview process?
Yeah, I've heard so many. Great question. But one thing I just want to say, I feel like technical founders are so smart. So you have to trust yourself that if you didn't learn something or feel like that was a good answer, trust that it probably was a bad answer. Just, I really want founders out there to trust that it probably was a bad answer and you should move on. But questions that I think you have the art and the science side. And because technical founders tend to want to understand the science side, that one thing to ask is like, tell me how you goal your team, OKR your team. Like, what were the themes behind those goals? What were the cadences? And then how did you drive a sense of urgency against the goals? And hopefully you get into a level of detail. They'll talk about people, they'll talk about pipeline, but then there's like 5 more clicks in each one of those tenants that how they goal. And they can, and a really good answer is they're going to drill down to a very detailed answer. I like to ask the question around like, tell me about when you walked into this company, what was the first thing you built or fixed or rebuilt? And why was that a priority? Bring me into that world. And why did in the first 3 to 6 months, that was the one thing you focused on? And I think a founder, would think like, oh, do they think that that was a good priority to focus on? Just whether you didn't work at that company, but like, did it sound like the right thing to prioritize? There's a fun one. Like I like to ask, tell me about a deal that you lost. This is a way to get at so many things. Like, do they have humility? Do they know every intricate detail around that deal that they lost? Because salespeople are competitive and they want to win. And if they lost something, they should know all the steps and how they lost that deal. And they should know how to make sure that never happens again. And so you can kind of see them come alive and rip apart the deal. It also tells you like how close they've been to the sales process. And I feel like even some of the best CROs come in and help close a deal at the end of a quarter, and they will walk you through it. Whatever level you are, I think that can unpack a lot of interesting things. And these are just some of my favorites. I think it's important to understand maybe, again, hiring a head of sales, like how they worked with sales ops, rev ops, how they just thought about the mechanics behind running the engine, whether that's comp plans or quotas or geography, just like that's a really science side of go-to-market. And so just if they like have really lightweight answers around how they worked with rev ops or sales ops, chances are they probably didn't even work that close with them. And how are they going to run the rhythm of the business for you if they didn't even sit close to someone that was running it at their prior company? Some other fun ones are just like probably sound, how have you increased conversion rates? That kind of gets into pipeline and how they think about pipeline. And then just, who was one of the first hires they made, whether that was an AE or someone in RevOps. And then like I asked them to show me the profile of that person. And then, I'm looking at that person's background to see if they look any good. And then, just what do they look for when they hire an AE? What's important to them and why? And then that kind of can back into like, does that align with your values in building this company and the people that you're hiring?
I love this. It is art and science, sales, and these are great questions to dig on and figure out what the truth is in both of those buckets. One fluffy term that we use often is culture and culture fit. And But especially when you're in an early stage company, and if you're mostly engineers and you're about to make your first go-to-market hire or go-to-market leader, how does a founder figure out if someone will be a culture fit?
Yeah. First, I think there's both professional and personal. And on the professional side, it's hopefully they've worked at 2 to 3 places at a minimum. Maybe they worked at 4 or 5, but backing into, sometimes as a recruiter, I like to ask, what was your favorite job? And that sounds silly, but someone always points to this one company that they loved the most. And then I ask, oh, well, what was the culture like there? And like trying to dig in as much as I can to get the answers around, not the fluffy ones. Oh, we were collaborative. No, I really want to understand why people were successful at that company and why people weren't successful. And then to like, and try to understand that across all the companies that they worked at, where did they thrive the most? And does that align with your values and your traditions as a founder in the company that you're building? I think that's the one quick answer to get. But then I'm just going to say this, maybe because I'm 100% Italian, but then, we do have certain traditions, Sunday night dinner with like 20 people. But like, do you have some of those? Don't have to be exactly the same traditions in your personal life, whatever they are. Like you can get into some of those things in a way. I think you should be getting somewhat personal with this person you're going to hire because it's like a marriage. You're getting married. And so like a little bit of both is good to like, that's those 2 ways to uncover, like, do you think they're going to assimilate in well and fit in well? And no one's the same, right? No one's the same. And so we're all different and just want to make sure that it's not a bad hire. So yeah, I don't think there's like, there's the back channel references, but I'm trying to think, is there ever gone wrong? Like, was there ever any like post-mortem of a search where you hired someone? I just thought of one, and we found out that this person that was placed in this role as the VP of sales was fired within 3 months, that he relished in firing people. Like he loved it. And it kind of it came out after the fact, after he got into the company and just started wreaking havoc. And I think that's like something that's like scar tissue that I have, because you should have some level of empathy when you have to make really tough decisions and having to terminate employees. But yeah, maybe that's a good one to ask, is how did you, handle those types of conflicts, the things that are really tough. I think that'd be a good way to back into like, are they going to be a good fit?
I haven't met many people who relish in having to people go.
It was scary. That was, yeah. Thank God they pulled the Band-Aid off pretty quickly.
It's like, to your point, that there's obviously a culture of an organization, but obviously every role comes with slightly different, behaviors and expectations. Your earlier point, right? Like anyone coming into go-to-market type roles generally is, there's a commercial element that's linked to their expectations in terms of what they expect from the company, but also what the company expects from them. And to that point, when, especially when you're an early stage startup and you've got a great, more senior candidate in your pipeline, how do you pitch to them that they should come and join your early stage business, that doesn't have the numbers that they might be used to? What guidance could you give? What do candidates want to hear, and how can founders best represent themselves and their business in those instances?
I've always had this saying that I've said many times, that everything sounds like Mad Libs. And so how are you differentiating? Like, oh, Series A, Series B, you've got this round of funding, insert top tier VC name here, famous board member name here. Everybody's got it. Like, so why are you any better and different? Like, you really have to work hard around the pitch. But to your question about, I believe that majority of go-to-market leaders, in no ranking order, they care about product differentiation. And I like to lead with that. And really, because if it's a crowded market and this is a way better product, and you can really prove that you have massive product differentiation. If I were a sales leader, well, that makes my life so much easier that I have something better to sell. And then even what if it's not a crowded space and you're displacing a manual process? Oh my God, that I would lead with that. That's like so exciting, right? And hyper disruptive. So again, product differentiation, I can't say enough. And I assume you have some use cases. So I feel like every sales leader wants to understand about the just use cases and customers that you have and why they bought the software in the first place. I think really important to talk about segmentation. I know there are some startups that go straight to the enterprise, but I rarely hear about those. So we are at the lower end of the market. And why is that important? Just because like, if you are very much square in the mid-market, and the definition of that is like 1,000 to 5,000 employees, I don't know, its segmentation is like squishy, then do not hire, a hardcore top-down enterprise 7-figure sales leader. It's not going to solve what you need solved. So segmentation is really important. But I also want to say, if there's opportunity to move up market, then let's also talk about that. And maybe there are product features and things that you're rolling out in the next year that are going to add to a more holistic solution and increase the LTV. And there is opportunity to move up market. And what does that look like? And that's important to someone in sales. So just really, I think obviously TAM, I always get the TAM, and there's really good and bad answers around the TAM. I think just they care about pricing, where you've landed. Now, base EV could be all over the place. That's okay. But there's probably some, you don't want to sell below this, or maybe you don't care. You want this person to figure it out. I do think, like you said, about they don't have all these SaaS metrics, maybe at an early stage around NDR, GRR, like that might not really exist just yet, but it's going to. So they do care about win rate. Just tell me about what's the percentage of deals you're winning and losing. And like, do they see opportunity there that they can help increase? And these are things that they want to hear. So if you have some SaaS metrics that are impressive, you should share them. And then the obvious, like from 2022 to 2023, things changed drastically. I think everyone cares about, do you have a healthy balance sheet? Do you have enough cash in the bank to afford them, this person's salary and the people that they're going to hire? They just, I think, sort of, you get into that at the end of the process, or maybe even midway, with the candidates want to know that they're not going to run out of capital in 9 months of joining a company. So, yeah.
Building on that very relevant last point, how have you seen have you seen an increase in demand for go-to-market leaders in this kind of more recent climate where the focus is so much more on revenue generation, actual path to commercialization versus just growth?
Wow. Yeah. And I focus on all of go-to-market. So I have to say, in 2022 and 2023, I saw influx of sales leadership searches at all stages, more than I've ever seen in 10 years. And I still don't have the answers as to exactly why that is, because I think we're going to wait and find out maybe in the next year. So always high demand on the sales side of sales leaders at all stages. And we saw a massive influx of marketing searches happen around the February timeframe of this year, where it was a little slower, and just a massive influx of the market. That, I hate to say this to all the product marketers out there, but not every search, but like 80% want all like revenue pipeline demand gen marketers. Right now, that's in vogue, where everybody was talking about category creation and all that, and that kind of fell in, like, product marketing was in vogue. And I'm just seeing the pendulum swing in this way. Now, again, at different stages, you need a different type of marketer. So I'm not saying it's a blanket statement for every company, but definitely a high demand with marketing and sales searches right now. And I have to say, we do revenue ops, and we're seeing a lot happen in the rev ops side too, where it's strategy and rev ops, and it's really like a big role. And sometimes I'm seeing it reporting into the CEO, which is really different. I don't know if there's a trend there, but anyway, yeah. So
that's really interesting. And then going back to the processes, and at the end of most recruiting processes, it's common that a founder will ask a task or a homework assignment. This can be, what would your 30, 60, 90-day plan be, etc. What's your best advice around when and what can be asked of candidates? Because people can be unrealistic. What's a realistic ask of someone in the final stages?
Yeah, and great. I will harp on what I said in the beginning, is if you've been run a really tight process and you've got your MET and your priorities, so the task could vary on what you want them to do. And what I see a lot of, everyone's heard about the 30, 60, 90. I'm not a huge fan of that anymore, but I do think sales leaders have it. It's still good to have. And here's why. So that's one thing I feel like most sales leaders are going to weave in the 30, 60, 90-day plan without even the founder asked. That was not the task, but they're going to weave it into whatever they're presenting anyway. So that's fine. I think that's a great opportunity to make sure expectations are aligned, right? Because maybe something that the sales leader was going to do in the third month was something that you actually want them to do in the first month. So it's still good to do. I've seen things like, okay, we're at 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. How do we get to 10 million? Just present how we get to 10 million, from who you're going to hire, what the cost is going to be, to just soup to nuts, how we're going to get to 10 million or 20 million, whatever the number is. At that, if you're asking that for that task, you have to supply the candidate with a lot of detail. And maybe if you have an AE, I would want to meet with the AE throughout the interview process, but like they need to really get under the hood and probably sign an NDA, get into your systems, whatever infrastructure you have. They're just going to look at pipeline. They're going to hopefully come to the table with a really detailed presentation. And by the way, there should be a whiteboarding session. Like, it should be interactive and brainstorming. And I think you can also invite other people in the room that maybe haven't met this candidate yet, or, it's kind of up to you and how you want to run that presentation. I've also seen, I wouldn't call it a manifesto, but I've seen founders ask, write a paragraph about what do you like about my company and what would you come in and change? And it's really interesting what comes out of that. Because like they're regurgitating what they learned throughout the interview process. You're hearing things that maybe you didn't know that they want to come in. And there's just another opportunity for alignment and to dig into like that. When I've seen that ask, I've seen people write manifestos and I've seen people write like one page. And so there's no right or wrong answer, but anything else that, I have seen a lot of preparation go into these tasks from both sides, really supplying the candidate with as much information as possible. And by the way, I'm not to talk about marketing, but like marketing, I always think, you can be really creative with presentations for marketers, right? How would you change our website? That's really tactical, but like kind of getting their opinion. And I've seen like amazing presentations around just that one simple ask. It really gets into the person's thought process and their approach. And hopefully everybody's learning something in that final presentation and you want to get married at all costs.
This is such a great range of ideas for getting a sense of how somebody works. I really like the idea of a whiteboarding session because you are simulating what the job will be. If the candidate takes the role, you will be in conference rooms whiteboarding together. So you are, in effect, doing the job, and it's some good practice to see what it's actually like. So you mentioned back channeling. For back channeling go-to-market candidates, when do you do it? How do you do it? Who should do it? You obviously don't want to kill somebody and let their boss know that they're interviewing. So what's the graceful way to do this?
Yeah. As I said, beginning, middle, and end. And I have to say, though, in this new climate that we're in, given what has changed, what 2022 and 2023 with, good and bad things happening, we are backtelling more. It's not to say it's become more difficult. What's become more difficult is like the truth, Was it the company? Was it the person? Was it both of them? And why there was not a successful outcome here? Whatever it is you're back channeling, it's really making sure that you're aware of the climate and what was going on at that time and the source of the back channel. Like, man, the source, is that a credible source? Because like I've seen back channels come from someone and the back channel on that someone was worse than the back channel they gave on the candidate. It's good to do like a 360, a direct report, a peer, a manager, right? But we are going like more and more levels deeper with back channeling. And who should do it? I think the founder should do it. Your investor should help you do it. I think if you have a recruiter on the scene, that they should be helpful. And have a tip though around, be careful when you back channel, because like that could be a formal front door reference for the candidate. And so if they're any good as well, if the candidate's any good, they're going to hear about the back channels, right, from their network, whether it was a formal reference that you mistakenly called as a back channel. So I ask for the formal references first, and then I triangulate on who are all the other people at X, Y, and Z companies. And then this way, we're not like stepping over ourselves and stepping on toes. But like you said, I want to make sure that the person's employed. You know, they can't get back to their current employer. That should be obvious, but we still see some bad behavior in this world, unfortunately. And then I have a doc that I can send you guys on just all my favorite back channel questions. But in the end, my best advice is like, everybody wants to know where this person is not strong. Everybody wants to look for the bad. I just like, how are we going to augment this person to be successful? Right? No one's perfect. And so it's easy. If you're looking for the bad, you will find it. Like, but how do you weigh that towards hiring for strengths and, not lack of weakness, right? So yeah, it's tricky right now with back channeling.
I like that attitude, though, that the purpose of the reference calls is to figure out how to set somebody up for success rather than only seeking for the bad. So let's say all the back channel is great. The founder has sold the go-to-market leader on joining the company. The go-to-market leader joins. Now, how do you ensure a high stick rate? What are some good onboarding best practices to set them up for success?
It's a great question, because I do feel we just kick people to the curb the second they join. It's like, go. And no one's accountable for making that person successful. But probably part of that final presentation and the priorities that I mentioned, if they can have a quick win with whatever the task was that you had, there was probably a preference to accomplish one thing first before another. But the goal is to get them a quick win. And the candidate should have a really good feeling about what they're walking into. And you have agreed before they've even started that they're going to focus on this first. And they have that quick win in the first month to 3 months. It just feels good for everyone. And I think there's the obvious, like making sure that they have access to all the data and all the information. Maybe even there's some onboarding happening before they even start working. And there's always like a more internal process, I think, that some companies have that are more sophisticated than others, just on how they set up meetings for the person in the first week and this and that. And that to me is more table stakes. I'm thinking about just like what is going to increase the stick rate. And in my opinion, it is focusing on getting a quick win. By the way, quick win could also just be building a strong relationship with the engineering team.
Has taken everyone to coffee by the end of the first 90 days.
Yeah, it doesn't have to actually, can get off of the priority thing. Because by the way, the other thing is it does take time. It takes 3 to 6 months to turn the crank. And so I think there's some level of impatience in this executive hire, that you have all these expectations that are going to come in and make the world pretty, but it takes time. So if those are small wins, then there's big wins. I think that just makes everyone feel great.
I think that expectation point is so key, and where, I definitely see this go wrong so much of the time. On that, when you think about where, the expectations perhaps on both sides have been misaligned and people don't work out, what percentage of these people aren't working out? Like, what percentage of first sales hires get fired, and why? And how could it have been avoided?
I wish I had the exact data. I'm going to guess it's somewhat high, but I wouldn't say it's 50%. I would say it's at least 25%. Maybe it's more. I feel comfortable saying that. What and why? Like, why? Well, it's because we skipped all kinds of steps. All the things that I talked about, all of these steps were skipped. And there's a level of diligence that maybe the candidate didn't do, and maybe, the company didn't do. In a situation where both parties did do a tremendous amount of diligence and had a really tight process, I have found that either there was something we overlooked from a cultural mismatch, or back to the expectations. I feel like the founder was sort of forced into hiring this person, whether it was a head of sales or, oh, you're going to run everything go to market. But what I feel like is when a founder hasn't really done the work around where they begin and end, and where this person coming in is going to be empowered to do their job. And maybe they would just push, maybe their board told them that they have to hire this person, whatever it was. And they ran a really tight process and everybody did all the right things. But then they got in and maybe the role that you hired them for, you really wanted them to just do this. And that's not what this person signed up for. So unfortunately, where that seems like maybe a bad hire, or that's like such a huge disconnect. I mean, I have seen it happen where the founder hasn't really emotionally done the work. And it's not because they're a bad person. They just thought they were doing the right thing. They just hadn't done that emotional work around, like, I am hiring this person, I am going to empower them, and I do want them to do all these things. And then maybe on the opposite side of that, the candidate felt like they couldn't do their job without the founder. It wasn't willing to let things go. But no one's to blame here. It's just, it's unfortunate when that happens, because it sets you back 6 months at a minimum when it doesn't work out. And it goes back to like the expectations not being realistic. And it could be the founder's expectation, could be the candidate's expectations. Yeah, try to avoid those at all costs.
They are costly. Although, you know, as people generally say, it's better to get ahead of these things and realize when someone isn't a fit sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah. And I feel like, actually, to your question, if someone is like shopping but not buying, like, I'll know it when I see it, or you've met 20 candidates and you still haven't made a hire. I mean, that's like, there's flags with that as well. And where you finally make a hire out of fatigue or desperation, and then it doesn't work out, or, you know, like, you want to avoid those things too. You don't want to be in a place where you're just shopping and not buying, because then that means there probably isn't a level of pain that you have. I know it when I see it. Well, I mean, then you're just sitting back from a remote control standpoint. Maybe there isn't enough things that are happening in the company, things meaning things that need to be fixed or built or rebuilt. If you don't have that level of pain, then you're never going to make a hire, or you might make the wrong hire. So
I want to shift gears ever so slightly and just touch briefly on all things systems, right? They're more important than ever when we think about company building, and especially as we see the proliferation of AI across all aspects of how we grow companies, and the fact that as a result, people are looking to save costs and often have smaller businesses. How can you describe like the go-to-market systems you'd recommend for building out your internal growth engine? So talking team members, automation contracts, etc. And then how does that scale? So what does that look like from the kind of 0 to 1 million mark? And then how is that evolving for the 1 to 10 million?
On the 0 to 1, I think, you know, the founder is leading sales. I do think that you probably need to hire a couple of reps and sell and get customers, and then in a system around what are the customers saying and feeding that back into the product and engine, or just everyone, because the company is not that big yet. So from a system perspective, we need a couple of sellers. The founder needs to continue to sell. And I just think that, so obviously from a go-to-market standpoint, it's so important to understand how the customers are using the product and why are they using it, and getting very clear on your ICP and the value that the product is giving to customers. The more you can expose there, and I think then there's more opportunity to, like, okay, I see this level of excitement in founders that, like, they want to pull, now they want to invest more in go-to-market. Okay, so if we're going to invest in go-to-market, then we're thinking about pre-sales. We're thinking about, depending on the product, right? If it's a technical product, then you need to invest in maybe solution architects. We think about post-sales a little bit later in the process. And sometimes I'm seeing SEs do post-sales work, but let's say now we're at that, like, further along in the revenue cycle, and now we're going to hire ahead of. I would say you have to think about building, we want to make this repeatable and scalable. And so obviously, do we have the right tools for our people to use and measure? How are we forecasting? Is it good enough for the board? We started thinking about reporting and metrics more at this stage, where it becomes so important at all levels to identify where the gaps are. I do think earlier on, if you have a BizOps rep, BizOps person, that person is like jack of all trades, master of none, but really analytical and helping you run the rhythm of the business. Like, there's a cadence, and it's probably somewhat chaotic. And so the more of a cadence that you can bring into the business through some of these other hires that are tied to go-to-market versus the product side, it feels like you want to make sure that you're bending the arc in a way that it is efficient and it's not too costly to the business. So yeah, I think we overhired, right? We were throwing bodies at the things at all costs. And I think we're back to the basics right now, though, in getting to profitability or just not having a high burn and being really thoughtful with like whether it's hiring or the infrastructure, or there's also, I'm seeing companies pull in advisors, but we want to be careful with that and not have 10 advisors for 10 different things. That's costly as well. But I think that at some point you might need someone focused on growth, and that's a very specific thing.
I love this view that early on it's slightly more art and voice of the customer is so important to the whole organization. And then later in the journey, it's more science and you need to have forecasting dialed and all those systems. I think it's a great description of crawl, walk, run for a company. You've been very generous with your time. One last question before we let you go. So we've been talking a lot about founders and company building, but you, while are in the service of founders, you also help a lot of go-to-market leaders figure out their next step in their career. So what should a go-to-market candidate be thinking about as they look for their next role?
Yes, well, I say be picky. Be picky. They probably worked in, hopefully, with other startups and other founders. And I think they need to be self-aware around what cultures they thrived in the most, and to remember the qualities in not just the founder, but just the culture that the company that they were at prior, wherever they had the most success, like try to just find those similar attributes. My best advice is also, like, I get a lot of questions around de-risking the opportunities, and everybody sort of associates de-risking with a letter or a number. And honestly, it goes back to what I said earlier about, do they have enough capital in the bank for the next couple of years to afford you and your salary and the team that you're going to hire? Even if it's a small team, I'm just saying, you're not building this massive empire at an early stage, but like that is the only way to de-risk. So I think with sales leaders, they want to know that you have product market fit. There's ways of figuring that out. And I think that's important, but I feel like sales leaders also help companies figure out product market fit. What else would they be looking for? Is there someone else at the table like you? And what I mean by that, is there any other leader in the company that has some experience that is going to help you grow the company? And I mean, it's not very fair to say to an early stage Series A company that might have two founders that have no operating experience or limited operating experience, and everybody else is an engineer. Of course, you're not going to have a peer immediately in marketing, but maybe there is a head of engineering. I do think like that's a prerogative, but I've seen that be a priority for some go-to-market leaders. And the other advice is, like, remember, we're doing this for equity. And I know compensation is important, but understanding maybe what is your minimum compensation threshold, so that, you know, going into this process and losing a candidate to compensation, in my opinion, is silly. And it's both sides that are at fault when that happens. And it's because, like, of, again, unrealistic expectations. So I actually advise a lot of go-to-market people, and this is the comp at this stage, this is the comp at that stage. And like, you should have an upside around your variable, but you'd be surprised like how some people thought it was like drastically lower. They didn't realize that it was actually something that they could afford to live off of, and their family could, you know, so there's just a lot of misconceptions around comp. And I think that's important to make sure you feel like the risk is worth it and you're not going to have to reach into your savings to pay your electricity bill. It shouldn't be that way, right? And yeah, we talked about culture, and all those things are important. Ultimately, is doing that level of diligence to make sure you're set up for success too. And I've seen in this market candidates going much, much deeper than prior, where they joined a company for the wrong reasons because it was a unicorn or someone famous was working there, you know. And I think the reasons why we join a company is like, you got to make sure that it really aligns with your motivations and objectives, and that you're going to be set up for success.
That's great advice. And this has been a wealth of good advice for go-to-market leaders, for founders, for everyone in the ecosystem. So thanks so much for sharing all this.
Oh, thank you guys. Good questions. I appreciate it. And I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Gia.
Thanks, Gia.
Have a great day.